You've mentioned a couple of pieces of technology, including cloud and data, industrial data, or just IoT maybe in general. Curious to hear your takes on the ever-changing landscape, but ultimately, how are those technologies playing a role in the selection process, but also in the implementation?
Yeah, so let's talk about cloud first. Talk about maybe edge and IoT. So earlier, one of the questions was, why are people making an investment in ERP? And one of the catalysts, quite frankly, is they're getting nudged as people move from on-prem to cloud. One of the implications of that is potentially changes the skill set that's required to manage the application. In some cases, it's great because we're relieving some of that burden. So that's maybe one change. It has potentially, depending on a bunch of factors, it will introduce some changes for the integration that exists. For instance, if you've got an on-prem solution and you are migrating to cloud, typically those integrations need to be looked at again. There's going to be some work there. When customers are considering the move to cloud, they need to look at why that makes sense for them. And it typically, 3 or 4 things spring up there. There is a desire to offload some of that infrastructure, maintenance and management, the scalability piece, if that's critical, particularly if it's a growing company. Sometimes, cloud's really valuable even during the implementation because you can spin up an environment if you want to test an environment for data migration or integrations. That has been really helpful for implementation teams. So those are some of the reasons for cloud. Now the IoT, and I maybe put edge in there. When I think of those use cases, they tend to be kind of maintenance, OEE type use cases. If you look at all of the big players, they have over time invested more heavily in that asset management piece. There's probably still room for improvement there. One of the other things that I wanted to mention on the IoT edge, I was chatting with somebody recently, and we were chuckling that if you go back far enough, things started on somebody else's computer, mainframe, right? Dump terminal. And then the pendulum sort of swung to client server. And then we're going back. And the edge IoT to me is a hybrid use case of that. But anyway, that stuff is critical, particularly in use cases that are related to a physical asset. Paired with that, though, you need to be able to manage the data effectively, whether you choose to do that in some commercial off-the-shelf product or whether you choose to build your own repository of that data. Often when you're implementing IoT technology, edge technology, you are generating a lot of data, and it precipitates the need for data strategy and data governance. So the example that I frequently use with people, because often, the conversation might start with folks that manage physical assets, and there's a question as to, well, why do we need to manage it that way? The data really should be managed with the same care, discipline as a physical asset. It needs to be prioritized. There's a risk with it. It needs to be maintained. You need to invest in that. Don't forget that, is my point, as we're planning a transformation or an evolution. The data that is generated by those devices, there's an investment required. And there's an investment required because that is itself an asset. And just like any other asset, there's a lot of value in that. So those are just a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah, as a follow-up, so I definitely see a trend of manufacturers wanting to collect more and more data. Are you seeing it being easier to collect that data? Are you seeing different challenges with the amounts of data being collected? What are maybe some of your customers saying or experiencing?
Yeah, I would say, look, collecting the data is maybe easier, but I would argue that extracting insight and value from the data, I'm not sure that's gotten easier yet. Mm-hmm. And just back to the analogy of the managing data like a physical asset, being a data hoarder doesn't really right? You need to be able to, I would argue, justify why you're collecting the data in the first place. If there's no logical reason for it, if it's not contributing to some sort of insight, a KPI, the ability to manage, it's not driving a forecast of some sort, I'd argue don't collect the data. Right? Is it easier? Yeah, there's connectors, there's all sorts of industrial data platforms. Yeah, of course it's easier. Is drawing insights, actionable insights from it easier? Maybe. I would argue in order to get there, you need to go through an exercise of a data strategy, being honest with yourself about what that data is allowing you to do, because it doesn't come free. I know in your personal life, you think, you just throw another hard drive in my PC and I'm good for another year or two. There's overhead with collecting, managing that data. Again, I would not be an advocate of being a data hoarder. There needs to be a reason to collect it. And not all data is the same. Some of it will be incredibly valuable. Just again, using the analogy of physical assets, some of it will be not that important.